For this podcast, I've chosen to analyse the Roman conquest of Britain and assess the military and diplomatic reasons for Roman victory. And since I've worked all through my birthday, I think I deserve some extra marks. To put everything into complete context, by 40 AD, the Roman Empire stretched from the northern tips of Africa outward to the Middle East and covered the majority of the European continent. Backed by the strongest and most disciplined army in existence, the Romans are in the peak of their power. In 41 AD, the elite militia of Rome, known as the Praetorian Guard, decides that the current emperor Caligula is unfit to rule Rome and move to execute him. As Garrett Fagan from Penn State University says, it was a really crucial moment that revealed the military underpinnings of an emperor's power, for the first time, in a very raw and obvious fashion. The Praetorians then nominated Claudius as the new emperor of Rome, thinking that his low intelligence and lack of military experience would make him an easy ruler to manipulate. Coming into power as a nobody, with no solid political connections and no military background, Claudius has a lot to prove, both to his subjects of Rome who fear his incompetence and to the Praetorians who have just elected him emperor. Claudius realizes that a war will solve most of his problems instantaneously, loot and honor for the army, and prestige and dignity for him. By naming Britannia as his conquest, Claudius placed a lot of pressure onto himself. Never having learned any solid information about Britannia, and in particular the tribes occupying it, the Druids, I'll get back to them, led to a distinct fear of the unknown amongst Rome. The same campaign defeated Julius Caesar 100 years earlier, thus making Claudius greater than Rome's most decorated figure if he is successful. In 43 AD, Aulus Plautius, a distinguished senator, was given overall charge of 4 legions, totaling about 20,000 men. This party will pave the way for Emperor Claudius to make an appearance later on in the year. The land of Britannia's sense of mystery and ambiguity to the Romans cannot be underestimated. As classical historian Pliny the Elder said, Britannia is fascinated by magic. The monstrous Druid cult professes that to murder a man is an act of the greatest devoutness, and to eat his flesh is most beneficial. The discovery of Druidism disturbs Rome and its soldiers greatly, leading to Claudius to ban Druidism. As Garrett Fagan of Penn State University, head of Roman Studies at Penn State University, says, for any cult to be suppressed, they had to be doing something that the Romans didn't like. One of these things is human sacrifice. This is of course a possibility, however, Professor Richard Weigel of Western Kentucky University suggests that the social and/or political stance of the Druids was a destabilizing threat to the Roman way of life. If I had to choose a side, Weigel sounds like he has the right idea. The Romans, keep in mind, still have gladiators, crucifixions, and daily murder back in their empire. So human sacrifice to me would not be something that would gauge this level of reaction from them. There need to be some kind of realistic threat. However, that being said, using human sacrifice as a scapegoat to invade an entire country was a politically genius move to gather the empire on their side. Moving on, the Romans landed at Rotupia, which is present-day Richborough, and marched to the River Thames, which marks the border of the powerful Catuvellani tribe. Caradocus, the prince of the Catuvellani people, gathers the fellow Druids, including his brother Togodumnus and his tribe. With what to the Druids is such huge numbers, they have supreme confidence in beating the Romans, much as they did 100 years earlier. To put everything once again into perspective, I will give the tale of the tape for the Romans and the Druids. The Druids were, A, fighting on their own land. This gave them a massive advantage because they knew it inside and out, and it gave them a lot of positional advantages in a lot of the fights. They'd also faced the Romans before, so they had some kind of knowledge of what they were going to do. The Romans, on the other hand, had a disciplined army, experienced veteran troops, with most of the legions going over to Britain coming from rivers on the German border. More money. They also fought as a tactical unit, whereas the Druids were separate tribes, and this comes into play a little bit later. They had better weaponry, better military technique, greater social structure, and of course, their absolute desire to be victorious, just to name a few. In 44 AD, after only 16 days on Britannia, Emperor Claudius returns home after being away for a mere 6 months, Although he never went anywhere near the battle, in terms of status throughout Rome, he is miles away from when he became emperor. He is now a conqueror. Triumphal arches were built, even though the British rebellion is still fighting strong. Moving on once again, the initial strategy of the Druids to combat what the Romans were trying to do to them was a really good one. They allowed the Romans easy passage until they were further inland when they could attack and ensure they couldn't escape back over the sea so they could just come back later. Using guerrilla warfare, the Druids destroyed the Romans in their first few encounters. The Roman army, however, was very patient, and they understood that Britannia was a campaign and it was going to take quite a while. I'll try to skip a lot of the battles and steer away from blow-by-blow kind of examples of what's going on, particularly because there wasn't one or two huge battles that decided the entire event, but the gradual wearing down of the Brits played a huge role, and also because it's really boring. The best example of the wearing down of the Brits is often the day after a big battle. Where the Brits would still be physically and emotionally exhausted, the Roman soldiers were able to go out and fight pretty much straight away again due to their intense discipline and all their experience. Skipping ahead, in attempting to take over an entire country is evidently not easy, so the Romans used many different techniques to ensure that the Druids became very dependent on them. For example, they ensured that they were dependent on their trade routes by cutting off all their other food and stuff like that, and also their economic systems. They also painted themselves as the good guys to many of the Druid colonies, with many deciding to surrender and join the Romans. Whether this was out of intimidation or actual persuasion, though, is unknown, but intimidation sounds quite plausible at the least. The best example of this is the Brigantes. After the initial territory was claimed by the Romans around the River Thames, legions were sent out in an attempt to gain more control over the island. The legions sent north met the Brigantes tribe, with Queen Catamandua as their leader. This was definitely a strategic maneuver. This northern tribe blocked off several of the northern barbarians' tribes, so it was definitely not a coincidence that the Brigantes were targeted. Catamandua accepted the imperial offer, and personally I don't really blame her. In a choice between continuing life somewhat normally but working for the Romans or being destroyed by them, the choice is pretty obvious. The divide and conquer method of the Romans worked extremely well. By isolating the rebellions into a small area, they took away their greatest strategy, guerrilla warfare. This is where the Romans fighting as one whole unit have the advantage over the already partially divided Druids. So obviously having friends in Britain obviously did not help them a little at all. I mean, having friends around you is fantastic for the Druids, but then as soon as they turn on the Roman side, you have absolutely nowhere to go. For the next few decades, the British rebellion, at first weak, grew strong around 80 AD, after the Romans began to withdraw. In the end, Britain was just too far away and became a thorn in the side of the greatest Roman Empire. In short, late in 47 AD, the new governor of Britain, Ostorius Scapula, started a campaign against the tribes of modern-day Wales. When Nero became emperor in AD 54, he decided to continue the invasion and appointed Quintus Veranius as governor. Final occupation of Wales was postponed when the rebellion of Boudicca forced the Romans to return to the southeast around the Thames, and they were not finally conquered until 76 AD when Sextus Julius Frontius' long campaign against them began to have some success. And finally in 84 AD, the current governor Agricola was recalled to Rome by Domitian. His successors are not named in any surviving source, but it seems they were unable or unwilling to further subdue the far north. So it can pretty much be said now that more stuff's going on around Rome, and there was trouble in Gaul and there was trouble in Germany, that it was time to kind of cut loose all ties, and they got rid of Britain so they could concentrate what's actually happening in more important territory. I mean, they didn't even bother going to Scotland because it was just pointless, and that's just the tip of the iceberg. I would love to go into some more detail, but obviously I only have 10 to 15 minutes and it would take me a year to go into everything. So. Of all the territories conquered by Rome, Britannia was the fastest to return to its old ways of Druidism. In closing, the superior military and political tactics of the Romans led to their concisive victory over the tribes of Britannia. But the long distance between Rome and Britain The inevitable decline of the Roman Empire and the growth of the British rebellion, however, led to the eventual abandonment of the Roman occupation of Rome. Britain. Thanks.